Happy to introduce our speaker, Dr. Martina Ramirez. She's a director for the Center for Teaching Excellence and Professor of Biology at Loyola Marymount University in LA. I would like to point out I've been to the campus, and yeah, the ocean's right there. It's very different than Springfield. We do have Lake Massasoit, which is nice. I haven't seen a Muscle Beach around there. Martina has worked in a lot of different areas over the years in a number of administrative roles as well as a faculty member. She was a faculty member for many years in the biology department at Loyola Marymount. She also was a faculty member at Denison University, at I believe Bucknell, East Stroudsburg University, and Pomona College. So she served in a number of different institutions. And she has won numerous awards for teaching for undergraduate research and for a variety of other things. We're very fortunate to have her. Her center is one that has engaged faculty in many different experiences and opportunities, including technology-enhanced learning, as well as some integrated education. So we're happy to have her here today to talk about this with us. I'm going to turn it over to her and sit down.
We got a lot of nice pictures here, so having a dark will help. So in any case, thank you for coming this afternoon. This is a story, so keep in mind, I went to LMU as an undergraduate, right? So that background sort of leads to the story that I'm going to tell you, right? The other thing is this business about doing an investigative lab experience is basically, it's part of my covert larger purpose, which we'll hear about as well, right? It's a very good tool for accomplishing what I'm going to share with you. So in any case, without further ado, let's begin. Okay, this champion thing, I'm a very humble person, right? Okay, so I think I need to say something about this. Where did this idea of getting behind kind of investigative experiences and pushing it in all formats I could find, where did this come from? Well, let's go find out. So I was an undergraduate from 77 to 81 at LMU, and first gen, low income, underrepresented, student in science, right? Okay, so this place had a huge impact on me. This is a different era. Okay, that's our former governor. That's probably his second run for office. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I was a yearbook photographer that year, so I took some of these pictures that you see, which is very cool. Okay. Part of the reason I went to LMU is because of this person. She was my high school public speaking coach for 4 years, but she was also an LMU faculty member. So as someone who was first generation going to college, I had no idea what this college thing was about, right? She was a big part of my life. You notice that gap there? That several year gap? Turn this on. Oops. You gotta make it bigger. You notice there's that gap from 72 to 80. Those are the years that she taught at my high school, right? So when I came back in 1999 to be a faculty member, she was actually a professor in communication and fine arts. She was actually dean of the Communication and Fine Arts College for like 10 years and so forth. So that's her retirement event, right? But the other people that were kind of important for me at LMU were these folks, right? So remember, students come to college not having perhaps a lot of context for what the college thing is about, right? So for me, this person, Howard Towner, he was my academic advisor in biology. I took all the courses that he basically offered. And then we were colleagues for a while when I came back until he passed away in the year 2000 of a heart condition. So he taught me principles of evolution. When he passed away, I inherited his course. Right? Kind of cool, right? Floyd Jenkins, I did work study for him for 2 years. He was a paleontologist, right? So he turned me on to the whole business of kind of what investigation could look like, detective work for things that happened thousands or millions of years ago. So that's pretty cool. So, but the other thing is, it was hard not to notice that the faculty of science and engineering at our institution was not very diverse in ethnicity or gender. Okay? So, in fact, if you look at this picture, you'll notice that there is this person, who you'll hear about shortly. There's this person who's a biologist, who I'll talk about as well in this talk. This other person in biology, she didn't stay around for very many years, but otherwise it was all male. Now, mind you, this is 4 years after I graduated, but this is the best yearbook type picture I could find. Okay? So this issue of underrepresentation by ethnicity and gender is in fact a big deal. And by the way, Jackie Dewar, who you saw in that prior picture, sitting right there, she was perhaps the fourth or fifth woman professor in the Seaver College when she was hired in 1972. Well, I had her as a freshman fall semester for calculus in 1977, right? Later on, she became director of the Center for Teaching Excellence, which I now run, right? Okay, which is pretty cool. So here we are. She retired after like 40 years or so, right? But having her, and then having no woman professor in the Science and Engineering College the rest of my 4 years there, kind of drove home the fact that there was an underrepresentation issue. And this is not just a thing for LMU. This issue of underrepresentation by gender is a big deal for institutions and society essentially nationwide. Women in the STEM fields get paid less than men, right? This is kind of one of those sort of astounding graphics. You have 100 undergraduate majors or women in STEM fields, 12 will persist to graduation, and then only 3 will be employed in a STEM field basically 10 years after graduation. So you have this attrition thing going on, right? But it's not just by gender, it's also by ethnicity, right? So here's a profile of the science and engineering workforce in the year 2006. You notice the small bars for African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, right? Okay. Professional women in STEM who are minority women, right? Only 1 in 10, right? Okay, so a lot of figures here. It's kind of just a different version of the representation you just saw. So when I was an undergraduate, I realized perhaps one of the ways to change this was to become a champion, to change this thing myself, right? Okay, so I had friends of mine who were protesting with the administration about the lack of diversity in the faculty, right? Because they could see there was this big disjunction between the undergraduate student profile and the faculty profile, right? So my solution, sort of in my mind, was to go and become a faculty member myself and work to change this stuff, right? One of the transformative experiences for me along the way was getting involved in undergraduate research with a faculty member. Okay. So I had a chance to work on these trapdoor spiders, which are common in Southern California. You walk around the hillsides like one of my students is doing here. You look around for those, and you have a little dental tool. You lift it up, and then there's a spider looking at you. Right? There's a little baby spider, right? So that's a picture of me decades ago digging out those things. Right? Okay. So I was in the honors program. And this was my honors project, was to do a genetic study on these things. And that, in fact, got me to an international congress in Panama, my second year of graduate school. Right? Okay. So by the time I was graduating, I had this idea in mind that one way to change, to flip the picture for ethnicity and gender, was to make the science business sort of more exciting or enticing for students, right? And one of those was basically by using this investigative sort of research approach as a big tool, right? So I realized that you could take students from high school by running them into appropriate courses and having them get involved in research during the academic year in the summer. They would learn a whole bunch of value-added features. Right? That would make these people, by the time they're seniors, very competitive candidates for graduate admissions and graduate fellowships. Right? Okay? So I've used this approach kind of throughout my career to try to change the profile of the STEM workforce by ethnicity and gender. Okay? So when I went to graduate school, I wasted no time in trying to actually start doing this. Right? So I work on spiders, so I had access to a National Science Foundation grant for 2 years as a graduate student. It allowed me to have high school students working for me. So here are these high schools from Watsonville and Salinas Unified School Districts, which are underrepresented, low-income kind of areas south of Santa Cruz. And here they are on those islands off the coast. They went to Santa Cruz up here in Catalina, here sampling those large trapdoor spiders you just saw. And then coming back into the lab, we processed up the genetics of these things, right? So here's one of my students, Pan Liang, when she's a student in high school working in the lab, and then here we are decades later. She's now a PhD in biochemistry, and she works at Community College of Southern Nevada. Okay, so pretty chill. So basically, the spider lab, quote unquote, really began during graduate school with those high school students like Pam and the other students that you saw. That's exactly the same thing we do today, basically at LMU. So pretty cool. Now, of course, these days, if you look in the literature, you realize that there's this set of high-impact educational practices that have been basically propounded by the AACMU, American Association of Colleges and Universities. Okay? So undergraduate research is in fact one of these high-impact practices that you see there, right? Okay? and they have a lot of sort of learning outcomes that come out of doing this stuff, right? To some extent, the more institutions can mobilize their resources to have more of these kind of practices happening, the better it is in terms of student outcomes that you get. Of course, decades ago, they didn't talk in this kind of lingo with this set of practices, but that's in fact what this undergraduate research thing has been forever. Right? Okay? So in fact, I had a chance to sort of take these things on the road sort of in a more formal way when I was director of our undergraduate research office for a while, a couple of years ago. Okay? But in any case, I was one of those itinerant academics in the 1990s. I got my PhD in 1990, and then I worked first at Pomona College, then at Bucknell University, then at Denison, and then at East Stroudsburg University, a state institution in Pennsylvania. Okay? So across all those places, there was in fact a spider lab running, right? So I had a chance to come back to LMU. I had a chance to perhaps think about how to mobilize some of these things more in the sense of how do you put this into curriculum and make it accessible to like lots of students instead of just a set of students that work with you basically in the lab. So that's coming, right? So how did we do this? How did we upgrade the first year lab experience for students? Okay, so first of all, let's get a profile of what it used to be like. So pre-1998, what was the first year lab experience like? Now keep in mind, I went through this lab experience as an undergrad. Then as a senior, I was a teaching assistant for this lab course, and then I had a chance to basically enter in and take it over at some point, kind of as we'll see. Prior to 1998, what did it look like? Well, for example, this person who I took this course with long ago, here's a syllabus for this class, Bio 101, from fall of 1992. And basically it was a single course. So Bio 101 had a lecture component, but it also had a lab component. So notice 2 2-hour lab courses per week, which is exactly the format that I took it on when I was a student in the course, and then when I was a TA. Okay? So what kind of things did this course do? Well, notice there's this book here, Laboratory Outlines in Biology by Abramoff and Thompson, right, which many people may have on their shelves, right, in various editions going back a long time ago. Okay? So there's a fall course, which is Bio 102, Bio 101, and then in the spring it's called Bio 102, right? So here's a syllabus for around the same time for the spring course, and you notice again there's a little more detail for what the lab does, right? So again, weekly quizzes, laboratory practicums, reports, okay? So in fact, you go to the details for this spring semester, you'll find this, right? So notice it's essentially a survey of the phylum, right? But then over here, refer to exercises. Well, in fact, if you go to that Abramoff and Thompson book, what you get is things like this. So here's, in fact, Laboratory Outlines in Biology, version 3, which is probably the version that was used when I was TA in this course, right? If you go in there and look at, this is exercise 35, right? If you look in the syllabus before, exercise 35 was basically annelids, right? So now you flip forward and find out exercise 35 is, it's basically worm dissection. Right? Okay. Then you flip over and more details, right? This is the same lab manager that I worked for as a student long ago, Linda Towner. She worked at this institution for 40 some years, right? So I eventually I was department chair, she reported to me at some point. So it was very odd going from this kind of 18-year-old freshman working for her kind of as a work-study student, washing dishes in the lab, eventually helping run this course basically with her support and eventually being chair and her reporting to me. That was kind of strange. Okay. So in any case, here's all the details. You notice easy and hard. That was really guides to the TAs to think about if they're going to show their students how easy it was to find these things. Right? So that kind of gives you a flavor of what it used to be like prior to 1998. Okay. Then we have this period 1998 to 2004. This is in fact when the lab flips to being investigative. Right? Now the origin here is that they had an external review about 1992. That was followed by the department retreat at the beach in Oxnard for families even. Okay. For years I heard about this Oxnard retreat. People had a great time. But they also tried to think about how to take the recommendations of the external review and put them into practice. Okay. So one of those things was to change it to investigative experiences. So in fact, 1997, the retreat happens. In spring of 1998, 2 of my colleagues, who were my neighbors in fact, Virginia Merriam, who you saw in that picture. Remember the biologist you saw in that yearbook picture? That's her. Kathy McElwain, they were my neighbors. When I came back in 1999, Kathy's office was one side, Virginia's office was on the other side. Okay. Well, notice, this thing is a course built around this business of amylase. Somewhere in here, okay, there's going to be group work, and you notice somewhere in here there's the amylase, an enzyme that digests starch. They built a whole investigative lab experience around this business of amylase, right? They eventually branched out into amylase beyond humans, into amylase activity in animals, all these kinds of things. So it's really cool. And they ran it for, as you see, a number of years. So here they are, my colleagues that are now retired, off doing fun things, okay, my former neighbors, okay. Here we are down in Santa Monica. But the problem with this course is they had so many bells and whistles in the course, right? They were trying to get them to learn science writing, science presentation. They had 1,200 points in the course, more or less. They had tons of assignments, right? It's kind of nuts. So the downside is there was no life for Kathy and Virginia each spring. So I show up in fall of 1999, so I saw their lives in spring of 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. Pretty much their lives would go on hold. They were running the spring lab course. This was not sustainable. So what happens is things change. Crisis, spring 2004. Virginia's going to retire, right? Then Kathy gets elected to be department chair. Who's going to take over the course? Well, that semester I find out that I'm tenured, right? So then, aha, we have a solution. Now it's your job. You will chair the revision of BIOL 112. Okay? So keep in mind, what I had to do is to create a lab experience for students that was not so destroying the faculty life, right? Okay? But yet maintain that business of basically science as a way of knowing the world. It's not basically a body of facts, right? Keep in mind, this course serves 200 and some life science majors, fall and spring. Right? There are 15 undergraduate TAs and typically 3 or 4 faculty. Right? So this is a large production. Plus you have the laboratory manager, Linda Tanner, at the time, plus work study students working for her that are prepping the materials for all these labs. This is kind of like Costco-sized teaching, right? Kind of nuts, right? So whatever we do had to be doable in that kind of large-scale format. Okay. So what we eventually did after 2 semesters of work, spring of 2004, fall of 2004, we rolled out in spring of 2005 the new BIOL 112. Okay? So here's our first kind of offering of that. We changed a number of things. One of them was the book. Well, here's some of the goals, right? So again, keep the science as a way of knowing. And what we came up with was do 3 real-world design-your-own investigative modules. Okay? Now, over the years, this course has been in operation, and modules have changed. As faculty have come in and out of the course, right? But it's always been kind of that 3 things. Students learn how to use stats programs, typically SPSS, as well as other specialized things in some cases. They learn to read scientific papers, sharing their scientific findings, basically. So in written, poster, and oral presentations. That's something that Virginia and Kathy did, and we kept that going as well, right? And finally, diversifying the TA lineup. Yeah, why was that important to me? Keep in mind the person that ran this course, who I mentioned a while ago, he was an advisor to a fraternity. So pretty much in general, unless you look like a fraternity kind of person or a sorority person, you didn't get picked as a TA. Okay? So that was kind of like, okay? So I had friends of mine who were students of color that were told directly that they should not this is not for you. So I knew whenever I took over this course, that was going to go over. Okay. We'll see how it was done in a little bit. Okay. So the book. This is not the investigative stuff in biology that you saw, right? You know, the laboratory outlines. This book is really cool. If you haven't seen it, you should go get a copy. They have chapters on kind of what does the investigative process look like. They talk about science as basically being like a detective story, right? Trying to find clues to stuff, right? They have chapters that explain stats programs, the nuts and bolts of how to use it, as well as what role does the stats stuff have at all. Why do you need to use math and biology context? What's this all about? Really great book. We used it in multiple editions over the years. Okay. The other thing is we walked through kind of how the scientific process worked. A lot of students had seen this sort of schema, perhaps in high school, right? But they necessarily hadn't seen this kind of thing, right? the fact that scientific studies are not always experimental in nature. Oops. Sometimes they are what? Sometimes they're observational, right? And it doesn't mean it's bad science, it just means that it's different. You can't control things in a lab setting all the time. Some of my colleagues who are archaeologists or things like that, they do good science, right? But they can't exactly recreate the world on a desktop that happened millions of years ago. Okay? So we try to talk about these nuances, right? Okay? So here's an example of some lectures that I gave, kind of about the SPSS program. How do you do a t-test? What is this thing about, right? What does it look like to walk through the menu system in SPSS? TAs did this stuff in class with them. The point is, remember, while they're collecting data for these modules, we're eventually subjecting it to analysis in SPSS, which is pretty cool. Okay. The other thing is the scientific paper business, right? And you can tell students, here's a guide to scientific papers, intro is supposed to do this, the results section is supposed to do that, whatever. One of the things that I found was handy was to take an actual scientific paper, go through it, and use basically, so you can in fact annotate PDF files, right? Such that when you click on one of these little yellow bubbles, a little box pops up on the side telling you what's indicated by the bubbles. So notice I just click the abstract, and I tell you, here's kind of what you're going to see as the paper rolls forward. Right? So I tried to dissect these things in detail. Right? What is this doing? Where is it kind of in kind of the scientific paper format process? We also talked about kind of when these researchers are making kind of good derivations from the results versus this is kind of over the edge and weird. I would say that in those thought bubbles, right? I'm giving you this paper because it's not perfect. Don't believe everything in papers that you read. Sometimes the stuff is wrong, okay? And I would give them a variety of papers done like this, some of which are great, some of which are like, wait, what did they do? You know, it's like, yeah, the reviewers kind of goofed. They let something through the system and resulted in this strange thing. Okay? So I sort of let them into sort of the dirty reality sometimes that's out there, kind of the scholarship publishing process, right? Because one of the things they did for these students is they actually took out the paper where I had reviewer comments. They got to read the original draft, they got to reread the reviewer comments, and they got to see sort of the final stuff, right? And they're all kind of like, oh my God, this reviewer is dissing you. Yes, I know, but that's part of the scientific process. Your peers kind of have a say in what you're doing, right? It's like, that's not bad. Oh my God, they're doing what you do to us. It's like, yes, that's right. Because that's the real world. Okay, so I didn't hide them, that kind of stuff, right? So these investigative modules, what did they look like? Remember, more or less what we provided with them was materials. Right? What we did with those things was largely up to them. So for example, we had a laboratory module focused on animal behavior that used roly-poly bugs. You know, things you find in your garden, right? Okay. So students got to think about what they wanted to look at in terms of these roly-polies, right? Some students compared physical performance parameters, you know? Do wild roly-polies behave different ones that are raised in a laboratory setting? Right? With plants, if you raise them in different conditions, would you give different qualities of plants like that? So a whole variety of things. So your students, they've designed some experimental module. This apparently is kind of a choice chamber, right? Okay. Here's the stars of the show, roly-polies, right? Not going to hurt anybody. Cheap, easy to maintain. You can get hundreds of these in a bucket. Pretty awesome, right? So remember, there's the students designing their chamber, right? So they work with their TA and they work with the faculty member to, you know, here's their proposal project for what they want to do. Right? You vet it and go back and forth. Okay, it's been blessed. Go do it now. And off they go. Okay. Then here they are collecting data. So notice this crowd is apparently interested in performance when you have different surfaces, right? So when they're walking in different qualities of surfaces, is their speed or ability to roll over and turn upright and stuff, does it change? So whatever. And again, these are cheap and simple materials, right? They didn't require a lot of stuff, right? Here's another one, plants, right? We had a project dealing with stomates, right? So it turns out that if you have plant leaves, you take nail polish, again, cheap and simple, you put it on the back of the leaf, then you basically put tape on that kind of area that you covered with nail polish, and when you pull it off, you have an impression, right? Now if you take that impression and put it under a microscope, you can in fact look at the number of stomates that are open versus closed. You can look at where on the surface of the leaf they're located and stuff. You can actually measure stomach dimensions, right? And all that's data you can feed into SPSS to think about different hypotheses you want to look at. Right? And it's all cheap and simple, which is the big, which is pretty cool. So, yeah. Then you have to take your story on the road. Right? So here they are. And I don't remember what project this is about, but yeah, this is the Stomach project. So this is the very first year we ran the course in this way. So here's these various posters, and then here's the faculty member. And then around the faculty member are TAs for that Tuesday, Thursday, whatever morning or afternoon it was. And the students are fielding questions from these folks, right? Because you have to explain, you have to share your findings with your audience, right? You have to learn to interact with the figures and so forth you have on your diagram, right? So you have to think about what are you going to transfer to the poster itself. Then you have to think about what are you actually going to tell these people in terms of verbally. And then you have to think about how do you go back and forth with questions from the floor, right? Okay. Remember, the fact that students did this 3 times during the semester meant that generally by the third one they were better, which is pretty cool. Okay. Now again, this is from, this is from spring of 2005. This is from just this past week. Okay. We're in a new science building that opened in 2015. Right? Different set of faculty, nicer. Notice back in the day, if you look at this one, how was the poster put together? Trifold poster board, and what are they doing? Gluing their pieces down. We all remember this. We probably did this ourselves, right? Well, now we have what? Giant format printers, right? You get a roll, put it in your poster tube, you're good to go. That's what they're doing. So they get to learn that stuff. Biology owns a large format printer. So it's in those. But again, the same thing happens. Here's the instructor, here's a TA, there's a couple of other TAs sitting over here, and there's the students, and they're doing this in groups, of course, right? So they have to figure out group-wise who's going to handle what parts of the poster, which is what you would do in a real world. Okay. So, TA lineup, spring of 2000. So, looks different. I have pictures when I was an undergrad as a TA for this course, right? There wasn't a lot of diversity in those pictures back then. There's a ton of diversity now in terms of who our TAs are. Because remember, if you want these students to see role models when they're first semester freshmen, right, why don't you share some of the diversity you have in your major? Right? Because it is clearly a very different, very diverse student body now. So yeah. Okay. So clearly this thing worked really well, but remember, when this was thought of back in the 1990s, right, the thought was that you would have this experience investigating in the freshman year. Then you would reinforce it in courses that came later, right? So this is an iterative process. The more you do it, the better you get. So really, this is very much like the Major League Baseball farm system, right? So for me, this course has always been that way. Right? So if it's working well, you should be able to take these students and plug them into, for example, collaborative research with faculty, which is where we're going next. Right? Okay. So, the Spider Lab at LMU. Okay. Remember, the Spider Lab has been going since I was a graduate student, right? Here's its like 6th iteration, I guess, of okay. So I became full professor in 2011, and when you do that, you give this professorial lecture to sort of a general audience, which is pretty cool. So many of us went to full that year that mine happened 2 years later, because there was this glut, right? Okay? You have to wait, right? Okay? So in any case, kind of as I mentioned here, my goal in running this lab is basically to think about how can we foster the success of women and other represented groups in science, and also find cool stuff about spiders. Okay? But this investigative lab approach has been a big deal, because I can take students out of that first year course and basically, oops, what did I do here? I did something. Okay, there. By the way, the lab has 3 focuses: a conservation genetics focus, reproductive biology, and environmental toxicology. Wonky stuff that I can talk about on other occasions, but I have these students do very much of the same things that they did in that lab course. We had students go outdoors to collect roly-poly bugs, right? Collect plant samples for like the leaf project and stuff, right? So when I send students out into the wild for their projects, it's not a new thing for them, right? They've done that, right? So here's students in Catalina Island sampling insects after a fire to look at sort of diversity changes as you have recovery going on. Students digging in leaf litter. They're not after roly-poly bugs now, they're after the spider that kills the roly-poly bugs, which is pretty chill. So those are pretty neat. Then in the lab, a whole variety of lab things to do, right? So spider eggs, oops, whoa. Spider eggs. You have to be counted, right? These little spider babies, we're going to do paternity testing on them. So each of those spider babies has to be transferred into an individual plastic freezette. So we buy those in boxes of 10,000, right? The students have to label them individually before they get the spider information. Okay. Student collecting spider poop to look at pollution. She wanted to know if there were signatures in spider poop that correlated with heavy metals in the spider's body. She eventually found that. We got a paper on it at 25. Pretty chill. There's a student from that fire study looking at insects she collected on the island, right, to identify them. Pretty chill. Okay. Numbers. Remember how we taught them SPSS as freshmen? They keep using it. Okay. Although some students apparently don't like SPSS, okay, we generally use static number lab, which is pretty cool.
Just to be clear, we came in and checked the boards before you
I
came
see.
in because we see stuff like that sometimes.
Yeah, okay. I see. Well, I thought that was cool to record. So again, they had to learn how to generate graphics when they were freshmen, right? And do exactly the same thing with their actual research, right? Taking data, data transcription and stuff, again, the stuff they learned in lab, they get to apply. The whole business of journal club, right? So I run this very much like a graduate student group in a way. They read scientific papers related to the projects they're doing. But again, they read papers when they were freshmen, so this isn't a new thing. Right? But I talked to them about how science is a community effort. Right? So you have lab groups in general these days instead of the solo operator. So in those sessions, they do things like practice talks for conferences. They eat a lot. I tell you, whenever academics get together, it's like, where's the food, right? As much as what date are we going to do this on? And who's bringing food and stuff, right? Birthday celebrations. She's now in med school in LA. There's her birthday cake, which is pretty chill. Okay. Taking your story on the road, beyond campus, right? Okay. So this student is giving an oral presentation at UC Irvine in 2003. She's doing an oral presentation, the kind of thing she got to do when she was an undergrad, as a freshman. Remember her, you're going to see Ning later, okay, for a reason, okay? Poster presentations, the same kind of thing they got to do in the intro lab. They're doing it at a conference on the road. But the same skill set comes in handy. Here they are at this undergraduate research conference in San Diego doing their business, right? That whole business of interacting with the audience that comes up to you, right? Okay? The whole business of using the data on your board to support what you're saying, right? Okay? That's a pretty important skill set. So do I inform them of the fact that there's judges out in the audience that are walking around with clipboards, going away after the poster or oral happens and they're rating you, and there's money given? There was money attached to the back of that poster, which is why she's smiling so greatly, right? This student here is a second semester freshman. She came to my office Friday of her first week of class, and then just within the first year, she got an award for her research, and that plaque that she has got her to a conference in Puerto Rico a year later as a sophomore, all expenses paid. Pretty chill because she won that award. Pretty neat. Okay. Of course, this works out. You get publications in journals, this is our latest one, 2017. That student, that student is in dental school now, as you can see. That student works for Caltrans. Okay, since 1995, 19 papers have been published, 13 have had undergrads as co-authors. The key thing here is to look at the citation rate. Those 13 papers with undergrads, 154 citations, 12 cites per paper. Right? I put that in there because some people have this sort of urban legend that undergraduates being involved in scholarly work, it's kind of lower quality. You can't really approach the big programs. Well, if you're smart about what you do with your students, are strategic about the projects you pick, you can certainly compete. Which is why I rolled that figure out to do. Okay. Spider Lab becomes a really happy place. People enter as freshmen and they kind of never leave. Okay. Big family kind of population, pretty chill. And I put this up here because my Spider Lab forever has been female dominated, but I put this up here to show you that occasionally we have guys, right? Okay. So the lab was for 7 years all female at LMU, and then Danny showed up because he was friends with somebody in the lab. Then Danny graduated 3 years later and went back to being all female. Right now we have like 2 or 3 guys, so pretty chill. But you notice the diversity of the crowd. Okay? This is May 2011. This is around graduation. That's the lab going up for a lab party, which is pretty cool. We just ate Chinese food there, so everybody's happy. Okay? This is the most recent summer lab lineup. Right? Okay, again, women of color. A pool party, right? One of my students lives in an apartment complex that has a pool, right? So we had pool time, and we went and cooked together. It was large. Okay? Weddings, right? You become part of people's lives, right? You become a really sort of important person. Because remember, in my binder there, I've got a study done by the Gallup organization working with Purdue University. What they wanted to know is, how does the college experience, how does it affect graduates' well-being kind of even decades down the line? What are the college experiences that coordinate with high well-being and high workplace engagement? They cite 6 experiences, 3 of which are around faculty. Right? Did you have a mentor that basically cared about you as a person? Right? Did you have a faculty member that made you excited about learning? Right? Did you have a faculty member that sort of helped you believe your dreams or thought that you could realize your dreams? Right? They express it really nicely. So the point is, if you're getting involved in students in an investigative thing, you get to know them really well, right? And especially if they come and work with you later, they become part of your life and you become part of theirs, right? So I go to at least one wedding a year, and eventually later on you get to meet their F1 offspring, which is pretty chill. So Teresa was the lab person that worked for me. She was dating this LMU engineer, right? Okay, and then stuff happened and they have F1s. Yeah, that's cool. So they came back to visit, just to show, right? And basically they laugh when I mention this, because it's like, yeah, you took genetics once upon a time with me. You learned about F1 offspring. Now you have some of your own. What it's like. Okay. So here's a selection of students from classes of 2011 to 2016. During that period, the lab had 69 students who were co-authors on posters. 65 of those were women. 39 were students of color. Okay. So here's just a sampling. What are they doing, or what did they do kind of after graduation? She went to Cal State Northridge, got a master's. She works for a biotech company. These 2 students, Mia is here, and this student is Rita. I went to undergrad with her uncle, which is chill, right? Okay. So they're in the inaugural med school class at UC Riverside, which is pretty chill. UC Riverside just opened a med school like a year or 2 ago, which is pretty neat. Jasmine is the dental student that you saw as a co-author on that paper. This student, she has a research job at USC. This student has a research job at UCLA, which is pretty neat. Okay. This student is down at UC San Diego in med school. This student went to get a master's in public health. Now she works for Kaiser Permanente, Southern California, doing something, I don't remember. This student got involved in K-12 teaching. She's now a principal of an underserved LAUSD elementary school, which is pretty true. Remember, a lot of the students I mentioned here are first generation, low income, all these different demographics. Right? So, there you go. So the moral of this story really is, here's how you can deploy this investigative sort of lab thing to really develop students. So I tell students when they start with me that basically we have 4 years to get you ready for the Olympics of life. Right? And my job is to be your coach. We're going to do whatever we can to take you really far in terms of your skills development. But part of that is also believing in their capabilities. Because remember, for a lot of these students from these various backgrounds, okay, from some of these high schools, they never were encouraged to think about very much in terms of their future, right? Just because of their skin color and or their gender. So the fact that you know that they can do these things and you believe in them. Some of these students told me, you believed in me more than I believed in myself at various points in life. Because I have to see pretty clearly that you've got the chops to do really well at something. Right? But the fact that you do that, right, eventually starts helping them getting their self-perception of themselves really better. So I said, this business of investigative learning, if you start doing it, eventually get to know students really well, which brings all these other bonuses, which that Gallup-Purdue study sort of highlights as being a really big deal, even for graduates that are 30 years out of undergrad. So there you go, kind of a case study. Remember, I almost went to graduate school in journalism, right? So I think about the power of narrative, telling stories, using pictures, right? There you go. Scientific emotional.
So I just to comment that some of the things you said I think really should resonate with our faculty in terms of we have a fair percentage of first generation college students who really don't have any sort of deep understanding of what sorts of things are possible for them. And that's mixed with a group of students that come really with this firm idea of exactly what they want to do. And it causes tension, I believe, among some of our students. You've got the students who are convinced and have very specific ideas, and the students who don't. And I think being open to the possibilities of the students who don't is a really powerful thing. I mean, sort of a cultural thing now is students really come sometimes with very specific ideas. I tell the story, but I had a student once tell me when I asked her what she wanted to do, she said she wanted to be, she was a freshman, she wanted to be someone who created prosthetics for children who lost their limbs in fires. That's very specific for an 18-year-old kid. And she was working towards this one particular goal. Now contrast that with some of our students. Now, how many of us in here have taught exploratory students before? Right? Ask them what they want to do, and they say, well, I want to eat dinner tonight. That's about as far ahead as they thought. So it's really a good opportunity for us to take advantage of that. So I appreciate that point quite a bit. And I mean, just showing hands, how many faculty who are first generation? Is it Is anybody? Is that me? Well, when I graduated from college, my parents said, you did a degree in psychology? That's cool. They didn't know what it was, but they knew I got a degree. And then I was going out for more school, and they said, aren't you done yet? So they had no idea. My parents had no idea at all. So it's an interesting sort of shift. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that. I appreciate that point, because I think sometimes faculty do lose sight of that, in particular in certain disciplines, because you just think students know exactly what they want to do.
So keep in mind, here's the Gallup-Purdue study. You can find it online. It's a PDF. Right? So in my teaching center job and in other circumstances, I deploy this to remind faculty that some of these things get a lot of attention, like being empathetic to students, right? That really matters, right? And the data kind of shows it. Right? So in my teaching job, we're running a series on empathy. You know, what does it look like to be a faculty member and have sort of an empathetic attitude towards students, right? The other thing that I mobilized, and you can find this kind of as well, is there's a lot of documents from the AACA that talk about their high impact practices, their set of learning outcomes and stuff. Like the LEAP initiative basically sort of mobilized me as things. Because I aspire to be a dean, a provost, you know, eventually down the line. So being aware of the mechanics and resources necessary to make space for this stuff to happen more easily, right? That matters a lot, right? But really, it's the administration that kind of has access to the levers, you know, that can make those things happen. Right? So when I go into that world, it's going to be sort of the full background of having been a contingent faculty for 8 years in the 90s, being the lowest person on the totem pole, being given wimpy space, you know. I had a lab, you know, one of the iterations of the spider lab was in an equipment room. There's a centrifuge, there's, you know, other things there. Your students doing spider stuff. And it's like, this is what you get. You're just a low person. You're going to be gone in 2 weeks. Here, go do it. Okay. So I'm never going to forget those kind of things, right? The other thing is I've been in institutions that had like 14 contact hours, you know, each semester, right? Okay. Which is like, where does that, you know, leave you space for a lot of other stuff? And it's like, yeah, I know it's a problem. So I'm always trying to sort of browbeat institutions that are thinking about if this is really valuable, and you mouth good rhetoric that's saying this stuff is important, then you've got to play with the mechanics of the place to make it easier for faculty to actually do these things. Okay. So, yeah. Yes.
I have a question about the mechanics of the lab section. With the statistics, like, so as a freshman, you haven't had a statistics course. How challenging was it to get them to download a program and do real statistics?
So the campus has a site license for SPSS, plus all the teaching, you know, like general access computer labs have. But yeah, you guys keep in mind, BIOL 12 is the spring semester. So I did that from 2005 to 2011. The person that was running the fall semester, right, that's the same person that taught that course as an undergrad. That course was not going to change until that person retired. When they retired, that space became available and fell at 11. I vacated 112 and went to 111 and changed that to be investigative as well. So especially in that course, because you're getting students right out of high school, they may have never seen stats, right? So yeah, we had to think about how we rolled it out.
Yeah, because
to make it intelligent.
It seemed like kind of challenging if they've never taken a stats
It
course.
took more work, but keep in mind, for those multiple years when the fall course wasn't different, they got a whole semester of college level canned experience. Then all of a sudden they're transitioning to 112. Where it's like, all that stuff you learned or whatever, that's kind of not the way sort of investigative biology is really done. So there's a really huge disjunct between having the fall course be sort of old school, having the spring course be sort of modern 21st century.
Yeah, and I guess, did you have to do a lot of extra tutoring about the statistics and things, or were the TAs taking that on?
Well, keep in mind, once we had TAs that came through the system, then they were deployed into the BIOL 111 course. That made things a lot easier.
So they were doing the teaching about statistics?
Plus me, yeah. Because see, keep in mind, so there's one 4-hour lab section a week for both the fall and spring. There's a Monday sort of pre-lab for the students, right? So in those sessions, I would present this SPSS stuff and would set the stage like the TAs did during the lab session. But the TAs went through a significant training to be in this kind of thing. So the TAs for this course are kind of the elite, people that have done research for you, they really know this stuff, right? But the other thing is they have to have people skills. Because the last thing you wanted to do is have people turn people off to science because of their attitude. Because in other words, I tell students, my TAs, it's like, look, you've got students coming out of all kinds of K through 12 situations. Right? Some of which are well-resourced, some of which are not. Right? They're going to come and be in your class at all different stages when they start. Don't presume that if they can't do something that they're unserious. They might not have really good preparation. So we think really carefully about who those TAs are. Because during those 4-hour sessions, there's 3 concurrent labs running at the same time. TA in each one, but then the faculty member cycles through the rooms. So you're not there the whole time in your room. So you really rely on the TAs to do a lot of that on the grounds. But again, in the 1-hour thing on Monday, like those slides I showed you, that was for the 1-hour things. They get a handout, with directions and stuff, and the TA can work on that. So kind of help students a lot. But keep in mind, when I went to the fall semester, where it was really just like fresh out of high school, you could see light bulbs going on kind of as the semester progressed. Because the thing, like on the first day of that class, I would have like a giant biology textbook, like Campbell or something, which costs a lot of money these days. I'd walk into class and say, in high school, you probably thought that biology or science was like this. And you drop on the floor and the room shakes. No, science is a way of knowing the world. The factoids in that book came out a process that you're going to look at. The other thing is, keep in mind, I was a competitive public speaker in high school. So all my friends were debaters. So you learn really quick when I was in high school that facts matter, but assertions are kind of only as good as the data that they're based on. Which is basically the same kind of stuff you do in science. Because you know what you know based on findings. So getting freshmen kind of disabused with this idea that knowledge comes from on high and out of a book, that arises out of a process of glorified detective work, basically. That's kind of a big deal, especially in the fall semester. So now when you get them in the spring, they've been through a fall of doing this stuff, right? There's less sort of work to do in the spring to get them in the program. But now that the whole year works this way, it's way better than it was just spring.
So how do you, because I actually think the idea, and I don't know how many of you have done this, but the idea of using undergraduate TAs in the class can be incredibly powerful if the TAs have the right sort of role in the class. And so what mechanisms were there in place prior to this at LMU, or did you come up with this strategy of using undergraduate TAs in your class? Because here at Springfield College and a lot of places, small liberal arts colleges, they always make this big deal, there's no TAs teaching the class. And so I actually tried to come up with a new term, peer educator or something, because I think ultimately the goal and the idea of having a peer there to provide assistance in the class was very powerful. But did you have mechanisms in place prior?
So when I was an undergrad, they already had that business of having undergraduate TAs operate, so I don't know exactly when it started. The reality, though, is for a number of us that were TAs and have been TAs for the course, a lot of those people who never thought of going to graduate school, the whole business of being teacher ready. That a light bulb got turned on for a lot of us that were TAs for that course, because really, since there's one faculty member in 3 sections, you leave a lot of that teaching stuff to your team, because you just physically can't do it. So there's a lot of thought going into who they are, and there's a lot of time spent training them up to meet up to the task. But the benefit for the TAs themselves is a lot of those folks. So in other words, some of the students have now been hired as sophomores to be TAs for that course. So I worked with some students last year, spring of 18, so I went back into this course just for a semester. Some of those students there have been TAs for 3 years, sophomore, junior, and senior. If you talk to those students, having a crowd of freshmen in front of them, it's kind of like old school for them, right? They're in their element. It's like stand-up science-wise, right? Now they're ready to collect. They know how to take complex stuff and make it in a way that students can understand. So that's really true. So there's a lot of benefits that came out of that. And remember, biology at OMU has always been big. It's always been the biggest major in the science hall. It's a big sort of financial benefit for the university of all these different kinds of stuff. Come, pay tuition, yay, or whatever they just call it. So I think they did the TA thing just because staffing-wise they couldn't manage it.
So biology faculty in the room, did you benefit from having a TA in here?
Yeah, we have the best students, sure, that are capable and articulate.
I think, because I started first year seminar for 3 years at a different school where I had an undergraduate, we didn't call them a TA, I don't remember the name of them. They were just there to provide another perspective to the course. They ran some sessions and they did some supporting functions. They didn't grade, they didn't see students' grades or any of that, but I found it enormously helpful to have that set of eyes and ears in the classroom, but also that other voice for the students to sort of resonate with. And I think it's something I would love to see more happen here. Because I think we may not have the students who are academically off the charts, but we have students who work really hard to do a good job. If we could figure out a way to make it work, and that means we have to figure out a way to compensate them somehow. I don't know what that means.
So students get paid for this, and we also get course credit.
Yeah, see, the first part's the harder part. The course credit's not that hard.
Mhm.
It's that first part that's hard, but I just think it would be really interesting in your classes, you tend to have, I know, but I think it's bioscience now. Bioscience is fairly large.
Labs or lecture?
Lecture.
Lecture, 50, 55.
55, and then labs are 20 or 25.
Like 18.
But still, it wouldn't be bad to have another set of hands in the labs. So,
Chemistry does. They have lab aids.
chemistry does have lab.
That's what they're called, lab aids.
That is, yeah, so just something I think it'd be great. But I'd like to have it in intro site, not because I need the other set of hands, but I think the students benefit from hearing the other voices. They respond well to that, and the students would work hard to provide some of those experiences. Anyway.
So you have first-gen students in this picture up here, as well as diversity.
So how do you reconcile between trying to encourage or hire racially different, diverse students versus the best candidates? That's something I have issues with.
Keep in mind, the university is almost a Hispanic serving institution because just among Hispanic students, I think everyone is 22% or something. And you can look at Asian Pacific Islanders and African Americans, right? So there's an abundance of students of different backgrounds, right? The thing that I've made go away is kind of those subtle or unsubtle messages, and unless you look a certain way, we don't want you around. Which was kind of what I saw when I was in undergrad.
Yeah.
Eventually I was one of these biology majors that got department awards, and I was in the honors program and stuff. I wasn't going to give up. So I applied as a junior, didn't get picked, but I applied as a senior, got picked. But I always knew when I came back, because someone that I knew really well was basically told to go away because she's Latina, she's not tall.
Well, that's the opposite way I'm thinking. I mean, if everything's equal and one is a minority, yes, that would influence my decision. But
Well, see, there have always been outstanding students of all backgrounds.
yeah,
What there was at some point was this sort of, you don't look like the way I think you should look. And that's gone.
that's good.
Now, keep in mind the department is now biology faculty. There's only 2 or 3 men in the department, right? And that's out of like 15 or so. We've done hiring this year. So we had 2 women faculty show up this past fall. We just hired 2, and we hired a male last year and then a male this year. So a lot of women. But the campus is over half women. I've chaired 8 faculty searches in the department since 20 years.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. I've been on a lot of faculty searches, and for me, it's just who's the best candidate, and then if they happen to be female or a minority, better.
Keep in mind, we had a chance to hire a Latina marine biologist about 9 years ago, who had a PhD from UC San Diego and was doing a postdoc at Harvard. That person didn't look, even though a lot of us thought he was silly.
And why was that? Because she didn't look the part?
Okay, so there's myself and an ecologist in the department who's also Latinx. The phrase that we use by one faculty member is we have a brown brigade pushing for the hiring of this person. That person has now left the university who said that.
Oh, that's good.
So occasionally, remember, 40% of the faculty in the Science and Engineering College have been there 10 years or less. So they've been a giant demographic wave. There was a time of transition, and that search fell in that category. So she now works at UC San Diego. And our loss was there. So we're trying to avoid kind of repeating mistakes like that. It's kind of
Well, thank you, Martina.